Story 1. The most recent modern invocation of the Insurrection Act took place in 1992, when President George Herbert Walker Bush used it in an attempt to quell the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles. On May 1st, federal troops were deployed with local police and sheriffs to maintain order, but the differences between military and police training soon became apparent. In one notorious incident, the Marines and police were called to respond to a domestic disturbance at a local home. When the officers arrived, the inhabitants fired a shotgun through the front door. A policeman yelled, "Cover me," meaning hold your fire but prepare to shoot as necessary. The Marines, however, responded instantly in the way they had been trained, where cover me means provide me with cover using firepower. The soldiers then opened fire on the residents, shooting more than 200 bullets into the front of the house. 3 children were inside the home at the time. No one involved in the incident was killed, but federal troops were pulled out of Los Angeles on May 10th, just days after their initial deployment. This incident illustrates the enormous safety risks posed by deploying combat-trained troops to a civilian environment. One miscommunication could have ended civilians' lives, children's lives. The fact that none of the bullets hit any of the individuals involved is a matter of pure luck. Story 2. There is a reason you separate the military and the police. One fights the enemies of the state, the other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, then the enemies of the state tend to become the people. William Madama. Story 3. My Marine friends say, "You send us in to kill everyone and destroy everything, not to act as police. Look at what happened in Iraq. They do not even like the idea, let alone me." Story 4. It seems like it was planned all along. Get the masses angry enough, turn the authorities, in this case the military, on them. I see it as a painful eventuality. Story 5. I feel like we are probably going to watch our own military slaughter civilians on live television, and our country will change forever. Republicans are all cheering it on in the conservative forum. I saw one comment being upvoted that said, "Send in tanks. This is the small government they all claim to want. They genuinely do not care about being massive hypocrites and never will." Story 6. The minute you start deploying regular troops to a city that has not asked for them, then you are an authoritarian government. I am sure that has been the plan all along. Story 7. Marines are going to make the grass grow. No, but in all seriousness, it is a very bad step. Active duty personnel should not be deployed like this in United States cities. Story 8. Our troops should only be used to protect the country. Anything else leads us into dictatorship. Story 9. As a former Marine, I feel sad. Hopefully, they do not lose control and try to shoot protesters, but that is not their purpose. Story 10. This is a test. Another one. This administration continues to push the limits of their power. Look around and see no one stops them. My knowledge of history is limited, but I believe this happened before in some European country and it did not end well. Our checks and balances have failed us. This is a tyranny of the majority, exactly what the founders were trying to protect against. Next up, deportation of citizens who do not agree with the administration. Story 11. Extremely terrified. This country has elected someone who detests checks and balances, democracy, and the Constitution. Story 12. Ridiculous overreach and overreaction. He is building and orchestrating an incident for numerous reasons. I served, completed my time, and cannot even imagine still being in the military and deploying on United States soil in this capacity. Story 13. With the first link, the chain is forged. The first speech censored, the first thought forbidden, the first freedom denied, chains us all irrevocably. Story 14. As a father of 2 Marines and a former United States Air Force Staff Sergeant, I feel embarrassed, sad, and angry that a vindictive person is using the greatest fighting force in the world against its own citizens. Story 15. Trump threatens to arrest judges. He threatens to arrest governors. He threatens our neighbors and allies. He wages economic war against Canada and the world. He threatens to invade Greenland and Panama, veterans, and Medicare recipients. He is an agent of chaos. His currency is the division of America and hate. Story 16. It's concerning, especially as the Department of Defense is still saying they are figuring out the rules of engagement. The rule of thumb is that when you apply the military to a problem, you will get a military solution to that problem. That is part of the reason why we do not use the military domestically. If this continues to escalate, it is only a matter of time until we have a high-resolution version of Tiananmen Square. Story 17. It is surreal watching states' rights get violated so brazenly. California did not request the United States National Guard, nor the United States Marines to be deployed. In my opinion, this means America is attacking one of its own states, California. It is well documented that California is primarily a Democratic Party state. Republicans oppose the state on that fact alone, and because it costs them many seats in the federal branches of government. If Republicans could take control of the state, as they seem to be attempting now, they could remove anyone in power and likely replace them with one of their own. This is a bold move, and we will see how it plays out. I feel extremely worried about America. This situation would not be happening if the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement was held responsible and conducted its business legally and transparently, without violating people's rights. It is obvious that the Proud Boys are now working for the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement across the nation. When you have to hide your face from shame, you know you are not doing a good thing. Story 18. Protests are happening on 3 city blocks. The National Guard has been called in, followed by the Marines. This feels like a 4th of July parade with rubber bullets. The best thing we can do is stay inside and make them look like bored idiots. Maybe offer free tacos, have a pop-up concert, and invite Michael Bolton to perform. Story 19. Not to incite violence with this comment, just wanting to point out the fact that this is a prime example of why we need the Second Amendment. Story 20. I live in Southern California and work within walking distance of where the protests occurred. We do not need the National Guard here. We do not need the Marines here. What we need is for the president to stay in his lane and respect California's sovereignty. This is a gross overreach of power. We did not ask for the National Guard, the Marines, or Immigration and Customs Enforcement to raid an elementary school graduation. States' rights are often used as a talking point for the right wing until it does not suit their agenda. Just remember, without California paying federal taxes, the rest of the country would be severely affected. Story 21. I personally think this person's video described an unfortunate truth. Too long. Didn't read. Special forces, Marines, and armed servicemen should not be idolized. They are specially trained to kill other human beings and follow orders. Sometimes those orders are wrong, but the mission is the mission, and it is an ugly truth of service. What I worry about is that, seemingly sooner rather than later, the order will be shoot, and I believe those orders will be carried out effectively. National Guards are one layer of response and example setting. Specially trained Marines represent a different type of messaging and response level. Story 22. Actual Angelino here. I live less than 5 miles away from the detention center where the protests started and are still centered. There are definitely more police officers on the street and perhaps an extra helicopter in the sky compared to normal, but otherwise everything is normal. There is a reason why most of the news media shows the same few blocks repeatedly in their riot footage, much of which is from previous days. The protests are still peaceful. This deployment of troops is not necessary. It is the Trump administration seeking a reaction or escalation, anything to distract from news elsewhere in the world and from former President Trump's recent failures. So, as an Angelino, stop talking about us. Locals have largely sided with the "don't give them what they want" tactic by protesting peacefully. The best thing the rest of America can do to help is to also deny Trump what he wants, which is attention on Los Angeles. Instead, talk about all the issues former President Trump is trying to distract everyone from in the first place. Story 23. If the conservative community is a fraction of that side, it's all bad. I know there's no real pleasing everyone, but you'd think they would at least say, hey, don't use the army on people. But no, they love it. The rioters are all violent and such, but they loved the January 6th participants though. They all say, don't tread on me. But when people pick up arms to stand by it, they are considered bad people. I am not saying the riots are good. Nothing good comes out of them, but that's because anger was fed into that situation. It would be a time for both sides to say, hey, let's try to solve this. But no, there is no saving anything. People are angry all over, and our president actually revels in it because now we are looking somewhere else and fighting each other, as we always do. Story 24. A lot of people are going to lose their lives because a deranged narcissist and his associates feel like playing war games. Story 25. It's absurd and probably criminal, but it's also extremely stupid. I was at the Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez rally. There were 36,000 people there, and the city was not being attacked. Where do they think these people live? Sure, they went back to the neighborhoods last night, but they will be back next week and the week after that. People live here. No outside occupying force will make a long-term difference whatsoever, and it is ahistorical to think otherwise. These ridiculous antics are unnecessarily endangering the lives of the citizens of Los Angeles, the Los Angeles Police Department, the Marines, and even the immigration and customs enforcement agents. Friendly reminder, none of this was a problem 3 weeks ago. The former President Donald Trump administration owns this entire farce, while they skip checking slave labor conditions in places like the agribusinesses of Kristi Noem's state of South Dakota. They are looking for a fight, and they came to the wrong city to cause trouble. Story 26. Marines are not trained in de-escalation. They are trained to use overwhelming force. This should enrage every American. Story 27. This is a great opportunity for military leadership, including the Commandant of the Marine Corps and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to do the right thing and honor their duty to disobey an unlawful order. Story 28. The Marines should create new commercials showing Marines pointing guns at American citizens. The few and the proud. Huh? Not much to be proud of right now. Story 29. If it goes badly, and assuming we are still a functional country when we come out of this, the military will probably be more hated than it was during the Vietnam War. Story 30. Nothing has ever stopped United States military personnel from targeting civilians, no matter where they have been sent or stationed. This is unacceptable. Story 31. Does anyone feel like this subreddit has become a way for artificial intelligence to gather data? Almost every day there is a "How do you feel about X" post. Story 32. Violates federal law. Military forces cannot be deployed domestically. This is going to cause California and Oregon to secede. They have no choice now. Story 33. I was there, and it was nowhere near as out of hand as the media portrayed. For him to order the Marines to deploy on domestic soil is insane, as if the Los Angeles Police Department, Los Angeles Sheriffs, the National Guard, and Immigration and Customs Enforcement cannot handle it. The only really bad thing I saw was footage of 3 mounted officers beating and trying to stomp on a man who was already on the ground. Story 34. As a former United States Army officer, I believe that any American soldier who fires upon an unarmed American citizen and kills them is guilty of murder. Story 35. Vote for an unqualified person, get poor decisions. I feel for the majority of United States citizens who did not vote for the former president. He is overstepping with this one, even by his own appalling standards. Story 36. The most updated Posse Comitatus Act, 2022, does not allow Army, Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, or Space Force personnel, except the United States Coast Guard, to be deployed into a United States state. National Guard and Air National Guard can be deployed within their home state or an adjacent state at the invitation of that state's governor. No exceptions. Otherwise, it would be a violation of federal law. Story 37. Wait until you are protesting something you disagree with, and you will see why it might be a bad idea. It is curious why this did not occur on January 6th. That seemed a little more out of hand than this. Story 38. It is against the law, and that is why the right to bear arms is part of the Constitution. Using the United States military on American citizens, even in collateral damage situations, is very concerning. Story 39. No need for a civil war. People get hurt in civil wars. Try a general strike. For one day, just 24 hours, no one except emergency workers does anything. do not get out of their chair. The whole country would come to a screeching halt if everyone did it at once. At 9 a.m. the next day, business as usual. Go to work, do your shopping. If they do not listen, general strike for 2 days. Then 4. And no one gets shot. Story 40. Just going to drop these here. Article 4, Section 4, requires the federal government to protect each state against domestic violence upon request. Nobody requested former President Donald Trump's help. He is overreaching again to no one's surprise. Posse Comitatus Act of 1878 generally prohibits federal military forces from participating in civilian law enforcement activities, reflecting a long-standing American fear of military interference in civilian affairs. Story 41. They are the wrong tool for the job. It is not a good idea unless they are Marine military police trained and qualified in crowd control and addressing civil unrest. Addressing civil unrest is a specific Army National Guard mission. Army National Guard units, frequently non-combat armed support units, receive specific training and qualification for this exact task, as well as being properly equipped. Additionally, Army National Guard units have a higher average age and level of education than the active duty component, making them less likely to resort to violence or escalate the existing level of violence when faced with non-compliance. The entire point is de-escalation and dispersal, not actively fighting people. The primary aim is to reduce tension and safely disperse crowds, preventing situations from escalating into further violence or chaos. Also, Army National Guard units are local and more connected with the crowd, often their neighbors, than the active duty component, which again reduces the likelihood of escalation. Being specifically trained and qualified in responding to civil unrest means Army National Guard soldiers enter these situations with higher morale and greater confidence. Being older and having higher education correlates with lower levels of escalation and violence and makes them less susceptible to misconduct compared to younger active duty units not trained for this mission. Unless they are Marine military police, these Marines will have low morale and low confidence entering this situation, along with less understanding of how to respond and what to do. In this situation, they are more susceptible to escalation, communication failures, misconduct, and overall mission failure than a properly qualified and equipped Army National Guard unit trained for this mission. Source: I am retiring from the Army National Guard in August. Story 42. When the first live round flies, and it will, the aftermath will not be good. I come from a family of United States Marine Corps members. My 93-year-old father cannot believe this is happening. Story 43. Donald Trump is trying to sow fear and distract from the failures and missed promises he has made thus far in his term. This will keep people hating liberal states and continue voting for the Republican Party, or use it to declare military rule, regardless of whether the protests are caused by his actions. All is going according to plan. Story 44. It is illegal as it breaks the Posse Comitatus Act. It is a gross dereliction of duty and more than an impeachable offense. Story 45. What? The riots looked bad. Sure, but not that bad unless I am missing something. Why not just have the police round up the violent and destructive people and prosecute them? Is it really necessary to bring in the military? Story 46. It is a deliberate and foolish escalation of the conflict. Donald Trump wants to punish Democratic-leaning states. California is his first target but will not be his last. Story 47. I was a Fleet Marine Force corpsman with the Marines for 4 Operation Iraqi Freedom deployments and 1 Operation Enduring Freedom deployment. This will not end well. This is not safe for the Marines or the citizens. Story 48. I feel like I am done arguing for peacefully protesting the government. I believe it will take more than a riot. The government will have to experience extreme pain to remove this administration. I am not afraid to say this because if there are lists, I am already on all of them, so who cares? I am sick of seeing my homeland turned into Nazi Germany because of America's obsession with wealthy white men being given absolute power over anyone they consider lesser. Story 49. There is a reason you separate the military and the police. One fights the enemies of the state. The other serves and protects the people. When the military becomes both, the enemies of the state tend to become the people. William Adama, Battlestar Galactica. Deploying the military to curtail protests is a step towards fascism. Story 50. Embarrassed, ashamed, and afraid. My father and grandfather were proud members of the United States military, and they did not sign up for this kind of garbage. This is the lowest I have felt about being an American, and I am genuinely concerned for the welfare of my children and their futures. This is very upsetting. Story 51. I feel like this is a defining moment for those Marines and where their loyalties lie, with the people or with a prospective dictator. Story 52. This is a test to see what this administration can get away with in regards to using the military. Do not be surprised if martial law is mentioned eventually and, with that, the suspension of elections. The slow descent into an authoritarian regime is starting. Story 53. We are rapidly moving toward a civil war at this point. Of course, it is illegal. Of course, it will lead to further escalation. That is the point. Story 54. Marines are trained to destroy enemy targets and engage hostile combatants. Deploying them to control a protest is likely to lead to violence. Story 55. A fabricated crisis that Donald Trump is attempting to exaggerate for donor benefit and support from his base. The base are not the people protesting but the diehard Donald Trump supporters who follow him regardless of any crime or detestable act committed by Donald Trump and his administration. Story 56. Anyone who follows this unlawful order deserves to spend the rest of their life in a cell. Just following orders is not an excuse. Story 57. Donald Trump should be impeached and removed immediately. He should have been impeached and removed on day one for attempting to violate the 14th Amendment. He should never have been allowed to run again. Story 58. 1. I hope they have completed ethics training. Due to the increased activity, I am worried that someone might suffer a fatality. Story 59. How do I feel? I feel that we as a country are over. There is no return from this. We and our families will likely not make it through this alive. Those who do will be reading about this in history books decades from now. Story 60. After all the time we spent at parade rest being lectured about integrity, it is time for leadership to put money where their mouth is. You all know this is not right. Story 61. It should not be happening. The military should push back against being deployed for law enforcement purposes within the United States. However, as usual, Donald Trump does not care about laws and the Constitution. Story 62. Manufactured distractions. His people love to rally around the flag. He was not just on flight logs. He was deeply involved in those files. Story 63. All I have to say is that he did not feel the need to do that when his opponents were trying to overthrow the government with a coup. I wonder why that is. If fascists are involved, why do people not recognize fascism? Story 64. I am a veteran, and this is one of the most disturbing things I have ever seen in my life. This is the move where all cities with protests can expect a military presence soon. Story 65. This was the plan, literally in Project 2025. It is time you all start distancing yourselves from members of the Republican Party in your life. They want this to happen and deserve to be avoided in your life. Story 66. Some of these politicians are just born rich and progress upward their entire lives, some making $15,000 per month. But some person selling flowers on the corner is dangerous to the economy? Get out of here. Where is the guillotine? Story 67. The American Revolution began when the military fired into a crowd of protesters. We could be going to a point where we cannot turn back. Story 68. It is going to be a hot summer. I hope the people who voted for Donald Trump realize their mistake. I also hope the people who say violence is never the answer understand the complexity of the situation. Story 69. I believe this administration is so uneducated that they have no idea what they are doing or what happened after Kent State. Story 70. Hate it. The average age of an active duty Marine is 19 to 20 years old. All these older people want a war. They want to tell us what is right and what to believe. It is easy to do that behind a wall of young soldiers. Story 71. I like the idea of the man who dreamed of having purpose in his life by fighting the bad guys for our country. But instead, He just gets sent to confront a group of children holding signs at a McDonald's or somewhere similar. Story 72. I am of the opinion that unless the mission involves destroying targets, breaching doors, and eliminating the enemies of our country, we have no business participating. Our entire mission statement is overwhelming force and superior fire and maneuver. That does not translate well to a peacekeeping mission. Story 73. Statistically, someone will be killed. The aftermath will be political clickbait and will not age well. Anytime a government deploys its military against its own people, it has already lost the moral high ground. Story 74. I am not American, but it feels completely wrong and gives invasion vibes. As an Australian, I was very upset when that person deliberately shot the reporter in the leg. They clearly aimed to harm. Story 75. Makes old bone spurs look weak and scared. Deploying all those people to show a display of power. Sad. Story 76. I think it is illegal and should not be followed as a legitimate order by the Marines or the officers. This president is mentally unfit and is using the military as an authoritarian police force. The military is not allowed to operate on United States soil by any president according to the Posse Comitatus Act. Also, the military should not be used against civilians. That is the kind of behavior seen in third world dictator countries, not the United States. Story 77. Think about how quickly it rose to this for what is a relatively small situation that is only a few days old. They wanted this. They were eager for this. Story 78. Any Marine who participates has violated their oath and should face appropriate consequences if we recover from this disaster. Story 79. They need to stop escalating this. If you want to deport people, do it systematically like former President Barack Obama did. This whole situation has been planned and executed terribly, which is not a surprise with a person accused of serious crimes orchestrating things. Story 80. Optics. Trump did not do anything during the January 6th riots because they were his followers. When people assemble who are against him, it suddenly becomes illegal protesting, and the Marines and National Guard need to be called in. It is not about justice or law. It is about a wannabe dictator abusing the law against people who speak out against him. Story 81. Not that the administration cares, but it is illegal, per the 2020 amendment enacted in 2022 of the Posse Comitatus Act. Story 82. I think we are going to see people die. And we are going to see Donald Trump and his supporters cheer for it because Fox News played the same clip of a few burning cars and deliberately ignored the previous peaceful protests that were assaulted by the police. If we ever fix this country, purposely spreading false information needs to carry a life sentence. Story 83. Sounds very illegal and not needed here. I am not surprised because Donald Trump and his associates really do not have a clue what they are doing. Donald Trump wanted to get the military to shoot protesters during his last time as president, but since there were responsible adults around, it did not happen. This time, there are no responsible adults around. Story 84. How do you feel about 700 United States Marine Corps members being deployed to Los Angeles? Deeply disturbed. I am strangely mournful for a nation that has always been pretty indifferent to me. There was a time in my life when I thought that we all felt about what was in the news the way I did. That it was important. That it meant something real. I have been disabused of my optimistic past. I know that many of us still want to feel the way I did back then, that we all still want what we believe in. I also know that many of us are now reasonably convinced that it will never exist again, if it ever did to begin with. Story 85. If the situation were reversed, Republicans would be enraged, but they are total hypocrites and have no integrity, so they are not. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.